Okay, I'm here with my good friend, Diana McCalment. Diana, I am going to start by telling everybody how I met you or how I recall meeting you. I was a student in the 2013 Partners in Policymaking class, and life-changing, to say the least. I don't know exactly. I mean, I know when I came in, you were one of the three that kind of led everything in Partners in Policymaking. So I'm not sure exactly how we actually met, but I'll tell you one of the things that changed my life probably was there was a day you and Erin Taylor, who is now over Partners in Policymaking, she was then too, but told your story. Um, and I think that changed my whole outlook on advocacy. It changed my outlook on disabilities. It changed a lot of things. And I think a lot of the things one of the things that really caught me was that you changed things. You're a pioneer. I mean, and I don't mean that as you being
old enough to be.
That's not what I mean. But you led the way for me and I had Wanda on here the other day and some of us. So I wanna start by kind of. Do you remember some of that? I mean, I know you've done a lot of those, but
I do. I thought for a long time that the biggest contribution I would make to advocacy was the things that I was doing involved with my son, David. But I realized after his passing that probably the most impact I had on advocacy was having the honor and privilege to be able to work with people like you and Wanda and Roseanne Duplan, and you can go down the name of who's who in Oklahoma right now in disability services, that I had a chance to touch you guys and to tell you my story, because I believe where we are in Oklahoma today is because of all of you and what I hope you learned from where I had been. So I think my early advocacy efforts were important, but my later ones in being able to work with you all were far more important.
Yeah, so those people that you just discussed, and I hope to have a lot of those on. I've got them on my short list of people to have on here. But to think that you kind of you're our guru. You're our our person. So tell your story. How did you get into advocacy?
So I was a special education teacher and was working in a small community in Illinois. And when my first child was born, I was already a special ed teacher. My first child born was David, and David had Down syndrome. And so that was back in 1968. And there were no services. We were a military family, and when David was born, my husband's commander suggested that we institutionalize him without ever seeing him. And I guess because I was a special education teacher, I just felt like I couldn't do that. I didn't think it was good for him. I didn't think it was good for me. I didn't think it was good for my husband. So we brought David home, and David found daycare opportunities, although they were slim. We sort of made them as we went, moved from community to community. But when David was 11, I think, the years have faded, Cody, we knew that the school system we were in was going to shut down the age group program for David's class, which at the time was intermediate educable and trainable. Those are old words. That'll show you how long ago that was. And our one option was to transfer school districts, not by moving, but just we were allowed to put David in a different school district, but we had to provide the transportation for him to get to that school district. And it was a 40-minute drive one way to get him to school and back to the school that he would have been, where they had a class that was appropriate for him. And they didn't pay us mileage. and there was no transportation from the school available. We had 4 other kids, and I was working at the school. I was teaching, and there was just no way that could happen. So we made application for David to become a resident at Hissam Memorial Center. And I hope that's a distant memory in most of the people's minds that will hear this interview. Hissam was one of 3 state schools, residential schools that were available at that time. And within probably 4 months, David was admitted to Hissam. And Hissam was the jewel in the crown of the 3 schools. It was by far the newest, most modern, was in the Sand Springs area, was supposed to be the best of the best because the other 2 schools were quite a bit older. Pauls Valley and Enid were the 2 other schools. And so David went to school there several years. Actually, he was probably 20 when a group of 7 parents filed a lawsuit against Hissam, saying that the care provided to their family members there was detrimental and in fact life-threatening. And that suit from 7 people became a class action suit. And I think, you know, we hear on TV now a lot about class action suits. If you've been exposed to this drug or asbestos or whatever, you can become part of a class action suit. It's not all as wonderful as it sounds on the television. It's a pretty grueling experience. But the judge did finally find in the group's favor and ordered Hissam closed. And now, of course, we think, well, what's wrong with closing an institution? That's a great thing. And it is a great thing. But at the time, there were virtually no community-based services. We had a few small group homes that Donna and I had started several years before, but nothing that could manage the capacity and the infrastructure that we had to have for a closure of an institution the size of Hissam. There were about, if I remember right, there were about 600 or 700 actually at the institution. And then the class, the larger class, took in all of the people that had been released and sent to nursing homes or wherever for some number of years. So I think the whole class was 12 or 1,300 people. Well, we didn't have anything to provide services. So that was where we built the system that we have today, largely from the ground up. And it's been modified significantly and necessarily so. When the judge was in charge of the services, and literally there was a panel, he created a panel of 3 people, and they were reviewing every individual personal plan for every person, one by one. So services were probably, there were probably more services provided than necessary because we were all terrified. And so over the years, though, that system is what has morphed into our community-based services today. And there is still a waiver. It's the Homeward Bound waiver. Some of those who are real geeky in the DD field will know that name. That waiver is still only for people who resided at one time or another at Hissam. But of course, with every year that passes, that number dwindles, and eventually that waiver will be gone. So that's how I got started.
Right, and I think what you know, to kind of recap all of that, you in that group of families out of necessity have built what we have today. You know, the community services and you know, our kids don't have to. I always get. I had somebody. I was trying to tell your story. It just small wise, and I'm sure you always get this. Well, why did they put him into Hissam? You know, and I couldn't remember the whole story, but I remember what you just said, and I read a little bit earlier. The services that we have today were not there. If you wanted an education for David, you had to either take him unrealistically 40 miles, as you said, or you had to put him to Hissom, which would have been a lot better for him. At least that's what you thought, right?
And, I personally never had the issues that the families did that actually brought the lawsuit. But in retrospect, living in an institutional setting is never the ideal place. And David had an older sister at the time who was at college. And so we just told him that he was going to college like his sister did. And he accepted that. And we were fortunate that we were close enough that we could bring him home every weekend. So he was still involved in community soccer and church and a lot of the other things that were very important to him. But still, if we had had any other option, we would never have made the choice we had. And I still feel, I can't say it's guilty. I'm sorry that we had to make the choice that we did for him to live in such a degrading, it's an impersonal, cold, hard place to live in an institution. All you have to do is look at the prison system.
Yeah.
And it was very, very much like a prison system. It really was. And I'm not saying that to be detrimental to the state and the many hundreds of wonderful employees who gave care.
Right.
But you didn't have individual rooms. You didn't have individual showers. You didn't choose when you got to bed. You didn't choose when you got up. You didn't choose what you had to eat. It was not a situation I would want to live in, that you would want to live in, that anyone would choose to live in. And so I wish that we had not had to have made that decision. And I'm forever grateful that Oklahoma citizens now, moms and dads and sisters and brothers, don't have to make that choice anymore.
Right. And we have you in part to thank for that. So thank you for that. I'm going to read, to piggyback off of what you just said. This is a letter from Diana McCalment to, this was when they were closing Norris and Source. I found this online. And one of the paragraphs, I think, tells a little bit of what you were just talking about. The irony was that when I placed David in the institution, I forced him to give up all his choices. Someone else told him with whom to live, when to go to bed, and when to get up, what, when, and where to eat, and even when to move from one place to another. In hindsight, I realized I relegated him to a type of incarceration.
Yeah,
yeah.
That's true.
But at the time, you were making the right choice for him. At least that's the way it was presented.
And I've always tried to tell parents, our society evolves, Cody, and we have new options, technology. I mean, just this last, 4 or 5 weeks with the COVID virus, many of us have learned technologies like Zoom that we would have never, ever used before.
Right.
I can see that this tragedy may play a role in making the people who live in the community now even more free than what they currently are. Maybe there's a way to do a Zoom meeting in your own private apartment once or twice a day, a way to call if you forget how to turn on the microwave, or just options that someday parents are going to look back at this time and say, gee, I wished I hadn't made my son live with 3 other guys in an apartment when he's obviously doing great now on his own, all by himself. But we do what we think is best at the time with the knowledge and the technology that we have and the options that we have. And so I've always told parents that it doesn't do any good to blame yourself for decisions you made when there weren't any other choices to have. So that's pretty much where it is.
So let's tell me about David. What was David like?
Avid OU football fan, avid soccer fan, loved animals, loved being outside, was a big fan of eating, I might add. Was very much in love with a young woman named Heather, and was really had an incredible life after he left Hissam, until he passed away in 1997. And it was pancreatic cancer. It had nothing to do with his disability. So he died at age 29.
I remember a story. Let's see if you can tell this one. Something about you guys being out and having a good time. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do.
Okay. Do you mind telling that one? Because it was eye-opening for me.
Yeah. So David's birthday was October 27th. And in Tulsa, that's always Oktoberfest time. And so David always thought that Oktoberfest was his birthday party. And that was a big deal to go to Oktoberfest. So, so on his 21st birthday, of course, David was legal. And he had his Oklahoma State ID, not his driver's license, of course, but his legal ID. And so he got his alcohol banned when we checked in so he could have a beer. And we sat down on one of the big long tables in one of the tents, and we got a beer. And he sat there and he drank a little bit and looked around, and I said, David, are you okay? And he said, yeah. He said, I'm great. He said, but my eyes are busy. And I said, you mean dizzy? He said, no, I mean busy. And about that time, some other folks about his age, probably young 20s, came over and sat down at the table with us, and we were talking and visiting, and the chicken dance started. And I turned around to say something to somebody and turned back around, and David was gone. And I thought, oh no. Well, David was doing what all the other 20-year-olds were doing. He got up with his buddies he was sitting next to, who he'd never seen before, took off and did the chicken dance and came back just fine. So, you know, those of us parents and family members can be incredibly overprotective, I think. Even though we think we're including them in the community, we're really sheltering them in the community, I guess. And David and his friends showed me pretty quickly that he didn't need to be sheltered. He was just fine.
Yeah, I always thought that was a really good example. You know, we do tend to shelter too much, and I think one of the things that I got out of that, and I don't know if it was that or part of that, but is we want our kids to be as independent as possible, you know, and we tend to coddle them a little bit too much, sometimes for good reason, but sometimes not.
Well, we're protective, and goodness knows there are times when we need to be protective with all of our children. But there's also a time when you have to let go.
Yeah.
And you just have to trust that, and I'm not suggesting stupidity, but he was fine and he had a good time. He probably had more fun than he ever would have had sitting there with me and my husband. I mean, we're a little older than he was. So he had a good time for the rest of that night, and he went out and danced with him again. And they didn't think he was an imposition. They thought he was a neat kid. So I think that we stereotype our own kids sometimes without ever intending to, and that really limits what they can do and the social capital that they're able to garner with other people. And if they don't have that social capital with other people, we're lost, Cody. It can't just be family.
Yeah. And another thing that I always tell parents is I want my kid to fail. And I know that sounds harsh, but sometimes they have to fail. We failed, in life.
We don't learn if we don't fail.
Exactly.
And risk with dignity, I think, is the thing. You have to understand that there are reasonable risks to take, and that if you don't give people the opportunity to have that risk, you take away the dignity that they have in being an individual. And that's hard to do, but sometimes you just gotta bite the bullet and try it.
Yeah, I agree. Tell me about, who were your mentors? Who were the people that you looked up to?
That's a really odd question. I don't know that I've ever had anybody ask me that. There weren't many mentors for parents, you know, in those days. Um, I guess my mentors were more from outside the disability community, but were what I considered to be selfless leaders and servant leaders. Cara Gay Wilson, and I don't, probably the majority of the audience that you see won't know that name. She was the superintendent of schools for Tulsa County, and not Tulsa Public, Tulsa County Schools. And she was instrumental in doing away with her own job because she felt it was for the benefit of the public education community that those smaller county districts that incorporated major metropolitan areas not have a secondary superintendent. I mean, there were two superintendents that were basically the same number of kids in the same area. That kind of leadership, seeing that there's a better good to be done that doesn't involve you personally and may in fact negatively impact you. I thought a lot about Cara Gay and people like her when we were developing the systems that we have today. Sometimes you just got to step out of your own shoes and realize that it may be something that may not be beneficial for you, but it's going to be beneficial on the whole, and that's what needs to be done. And I think that, you know, that type of person was the type of person that I sought as my mentor.
That's a good one. As a parent, it's difficult raising a child anyways, but especially with you know, a disability of some sort. It's kind of a two-part question. What was the hardest thing for you, and what advice would you have for, you know, what I call newly diagnosed parents?
Oh, the hardest thing, of course, short of losing him, you know, when he passed, was watching him walk down that hallway at Hissam. I'll never forget, I didn't know where he was going. We hadn't seen where they slept, where they ate. And during that time period, it was 8 weeks before we could see him again. They believed at the time that severing contact was the most humane and reasonable thing to do between the parents and the kids. And so watching him go, not knowing who was going to take care of him or where he was going to be, was a nightmare. That was the hardest thing I ever did. And I need to say, and Cody, you know this, there are still parents that are having to make that decision today. Our behavioral health system for people who are dually diagnosed is tragically underfunded. And there are still families that are making those decisions to send their kids away for their benefit. And I'm just waiting for the day that that's not there any longer. We've not conquered that mountain yet, but I don't want to make it sound like all of these decisions that I made are in the past, because there are people today that are making exactly those same decisions because they have no choice. Again, there aren't any options. Someday there will be. I'm convinced of that. I know there will, because people like you and Wanda and Roseanne and a bunch of other folks. But that was the hardest thing to do, without a doubt. Advice. Best advice I ever got was the first pediatric visit I had with David. His pediatrician on the base had 6 kids of his own. He was a colonel, and he'd never delivered or treated, well, he didn't deliver, but he'd never treated a child with Down's syndrome before. And I don't know where he got this insight, but he said, take him home and treat him like he's your baby, because he is. And I tried to do that from then on. I mean, if we went somewhere, David went somewhere. And as our other children were born, if they got into soccer, we found a place for David to be in soccer. When we went to church, David went to church. He was never at home. I mean, he was in the community from the day he was born, because that's what we would have done with any other child. And I think that was truly the best advice that I ever had. And that's still the advice I would give to any parent. They're still your baby. They're still your child. And what you would do with any other child, to the amount that your child can physically manage to do that, whatever you have to do for modifications to make it happen, your baby needs to be with you in the community, doing whatever you do with your family and the rest of your kids, because that's what's going to keep the community caring about that child. And that's the key to the whole thing. They've got to have a whole village. I know that gets trite sometimes, but it's true. Even at the voting booth, if people don't understand what your issues are, they're not likely to vote for measures that will be in favor of supporting your family members. And so they've got to fall in love with the person in your life who is different.
I think that's great advice. You know, and with Connor, we've done the same thing. It's make sure that he goes places. We've been on vacations. He's been in Boy Scouts. We did everything that he wanted to do, you know, and,
Yes.
and a few things he didn't want to do, but,
Exactly.
you know, and his classmates, his people at school, they accept him. They take him in for who he is. And it's because we pushed to make sure that he was in there, you know. One of the honors of my life was last year. I got the Diana Award, which is a statewide award for advocacy. And I've said this many times. I'm honored for the award, but I'm twice as honored because it has your name on it. And I mean that. Anything I've asked, you know, you've helped me with over the years. I think what a lot of people don't realize is that you were as instrumental, if not the most instrumental person in making Pervasive Parenting Center an actuality, you know. I remember being in Partners in Policymaking, and we were, I almost said forced. We were challenged.
Forced was probably right.
we were challenged to come up with I think it was a 5-year plan, maybe a 10-year plan, and my plan was the Pervasive Parenting Center. You remember this, and I know this.
I do remember it. I do remember it vividly.
And I said to you, I said, here's my idea. And I had it laid out. I had it outlined. And I said, I think this is what I would like to do, but it may just be a pipe dream. And you said, oh, no, it is not. I think you were the first one that made me believe that I could actually do this. There were a lot of people along the way that have helped me. Joni Bruce helped me write the grant. Sharon Long helped. She gave me the idea, you know, hey, here's this grant. You need to apply for it. But you were the first one that said, hey, this is a great idea, and I think you can make this happen. And here we sit. What is it?
8?
Almost 8 years. Yeah, 7 years. 7 years later, and we have a grant from the U.S. Department of Ed. I have an office. I have families. You know, we've helped, and I'm not throwing this out just to brag. We've helped well over 400 families in rural eastern Oklahoma with just lots of different things. And so your legacy carries on over here in the eastern part of the state. So.
And I am honored by that. I remember when you introduced yourself to the partners class and told them where you were from, and you said, I don't know what any of this is about because I've never heard of any of it and none of it's available where I am. And by the end of the class, the 9 months, you had the vision that you were going to take that back.
Yeah.
And you did. So
yeah. A lot of a lot of the programs that we do here, the SIB shop, we learned in
Yeah.
partners. There were so many things that I said, why can't we have this here? And we did, and but again, I could have just walked away and said, I'm done. But I don't think I think I didn't want to disappoint you more than anything. So thank you.
You're welcome. And thank you for all you have done.
Well, and I've still got lots to do. You and I say
Yes,
this
you do.
every time we talk to each other. I say there's still more. There's still more. So
There is. There is.
well, I appreciate your time. I have no more questions. Is there anything you want to add?
I just hope that those of you who have an opportunity to work with Cody will understand his passion and realize that Cody is no different than you are. When he started 7 years ago, he was a parent just like every parent Cody works with today. And when you gain a little knowledge and you get somebody who will talk with you and support your ideas, there isn't one person that Cody works with that can't go out and do things equal to and better than what Cody has done so far. When he walked into the Partners program, he had no idea that the Pervasive Parenting Center would ever exist. So don't ever sell yourself short. Advocacy looks different in every person. And if you have a dream or you see a need, you can fill that need. You just need somebody to believe in you and somebody to support you. And I know Cody's that person for you. So.
Well, thank you again for your time. All right.